Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. The theater was dim enough to hide a heartbeat, but not quiet enough to silence mine. I remember the flicker of light across the screen painting soft shadows over us, over him, my husband, steady and composed, eyes fixed forward like this was any ordinary night. And over me, unraveling, thread by quiet thread. We had always been good at pretending. Good at being the kind of couple people admired, gentle laughter, shared glances, hands brushing like habit instead of hunger. But beneath that calm surface, something unspoken had been growing for years. Not absence of love, never that, but a different shape of it. One that asked strange questions and waited patiently for daring answers. The man beside me was a stranger only in name. We hadn't exchanged more than a few words before the lights dimmed, yet there was a silent understanding in the air, like a page already half-written. My fingers trembled before they moved, not out of fear, but from the weight of being seen without being looked at. I felt my husband shift slightly in his seat, not toward me, not away, just enough to remind me he was there. Present. Choosing this moment with me. The movie played on, voices rising and falling in dramatic rhythm, but none of it reached me. My world had narrowed to breath, to proximity, to the quiet permission that lingered between the three of us. When a soft sound escaped me, half surprise, half something deeper, I instinctively leaned into the safety of my popcorn bucket, as if it could swallow the truth of what I was feeling. That's when he leaned closer, my husband, his voice brushing against my ear like a secret meant only for me. I hope you finish before the credits. There was no jealousy in his tone. No hesitation. Just something warm, something knowing. And suddenly, I wasn't divided between two men, I was held, in a strange and fragile way, by both. I turned my head just slightly, enough to catch the outline of his profile in the glow of the screen. I wanted to read him, to understand what this meant for us, what it would change. But he didn't look back. And that's when I realized this wasn't new for him. And maybe it wasn't going to end here. The silence between us grew louder than the film. I kept my eyes forward, but everything inside me had turned inward, toward memory, toward the quiet evolution of a marriage that had never been simple, only honest in ways most people were too afraid to name. We hadn't started like this. There were years, soft, predictable years, where love looked like shared breakfasts and sleepy conversations, where his hand in mine was enough to anchor me. He had always been gentle, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who noticed the small shifts in my moods before I did. But somewhere along the way, we began telling each other truths that didn't fit neatly into vows. It started with conversations late at night. Questions that hovered carefully between curiosity and confession. What does it mean to belong to someone? Can love stretch without breaking? Can desire exist without betrayal? He never answered quickly. That was his way. He would sit with a thought, turn it over like something fragile, and then offer it back to me with surprising clarity. I don't want to own you, he told me once, his voice barely above a whisper in the dark. I just want you to come back to me, honestly. And I had. Every time. Even now, sitting in the dim glow of the theater, I felt that invisible thread between us, stronger than anything physical, something chosen over and over again. The man beside me shifted slightly, his presence no longer unfamiliar, but not fully known either. There was a different kind of energy with him, unpredictable, unscripted. Not love, not even close, but something that reflected a version of me I rarely let the world see. And maybe that was the point. I wasn't escaping my husband. I was returning to him, in pieces I didn't know how to show any other way. Still, a question pressed quietly against my chest. How much of this was freedom, and how much was something we hadn't fully understood yet? I risked another glance at him, my husband. His posture hadn't changed, but his fingers tapped lightly against his knee now, a rhythm just slightly offbeat. It was the smallest crack in his calm, but I saw it. He felt this too. Not just acceptance. Not just control. Something deeper. Something human. And for the first time that night, uncertainty slipped in, not sharp or frightening, but heavy with meaning. What were we becoming? And when the lights came up, would we still recognize ourselves in each other? The credits hadn't rolled, but something inside me already had. Not an ending, just a shift I couldn't ignore anymore. I leaned back slightly, letting the seat hold me as my thoughts drifted somewhere older, somewhere quieter. There had been a time, early in our marriage, when I mistook comfort for completeness. When the absence of conflict felt like success, and I didn't yet understand that love could evolve into unfamiliar shapes. But then came the first fracture, not loud, not dramatic. Just a conversation that lingered too long. It was after a dinner with friends, when laughter had felt just a little forced. On the drive home, I stared out the window and admitted something I hadn't planned to say. I feel like there's a version of me you've never met. He didn't react right away. Just kept driving, hands steady on the wheel. Then maybe, he said finally, we should stop pretending I'm supposed to be the only one who gets to meet her. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it gave permission, but because it shifted responsibility. This wasn't about what he allowed. It was about what we were brave enough to face together. And yet, bravery isn't always clean. Back in the theater, I felt it, the complexity of that choice pressing in. The stranger beside me wasn't just part of a moment. He represented something unfinished, something unresolved inside me. A question I had been circling for years without fully answering. Was I exploring or avoiding? My husband exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. That quiet release carried more weight than words. I wondered what memories were surfacing for him now. If he was thinking about that night too, or about the ones we never spoke of again. Because this hadn't been our first edge. There had been others. Subtle experiments in honesty, moments where we stepped outside the lines and then carefully traced our way back. Each time, we told ourselves it made us stronger. More real. But real doesn't always mean easy. I shifted slightly, aware now of the space between all three of us, not just physical, but emotional. 3 separate histories intersecting in a place meant for fiction. And suddenly, I felt it. Not guilt, but gravity. Because this wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about trust stretched to its quiet limit. About whether love could hold something this complicated without changing shape entirely. I turned my head again, just enough to see my husband's reflection faintly in the dark screen during a dim scene. His expression wasn't distant. It was searching. And for the first time, I wondered, what if he wasn't just watching me? What if he was waiting to see who I would become next? The air felt heavier now, like the room itself was holding its breath. I couldn't tell if it was the closeness, the quiet, or the weight of everything unspoken, but something inside me was rising, pressing against the careful balance we had built over time. I became aware of my own heartbeat again. Not frantic, not reckless, but insistent. Asking to be acknowledged. For years, I had lived between 2 versions of myself. The one who was steady, devoted, deeply rooted in the life we built together, and the one who lingered just beneath the surface, curious, restless, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Tonight, they were no longer separate. They were colliding. I shifted slightly, my breath catching, not because of what I was doing, but because of what it meant. Because this moment wasn't hidden anymore. It wasn't theoretical or safely discussed in the quiet of our bedroom. It was real. And he was right there beside me. My husband. Not distant. Not unaware. Present. Choosing to stay. That realization hit deeper than anything else. It softened something in me and shattered something else at the same time. Because love, real love, wasn't supposed to feel like a test, but this did. Not of loyalty. Of truth. I turned toward him more fully this time, no longer stealing glances, but searching openly. The screen flickered across his face, catching the faint tension in his jaw, the way his eyes had lost focus on the film entirely. He felt it too, the shift, the edge we were standing on. "Are you okay?" I whispered, my voice barely there, fragile in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be all night. For a second, he didn't answer. And in that silence, everything stretched. Every memory, every late-night conversation, every promise we had reshaped to fit who we were becoming. Finally, he turned his head. Not fully, just enough. His eyes met mine, and there it was, not certainty, not control, but something raw. "I don't know," he said quietly. Honest. Unfiltered. And somehow, that felt more intimate than anything else. Because for the first time, this wasn't something he had already thought through, already accepted, already placed neatly into understanding. He was in it now. With me. And suddenly, the balance shifted. This wasn't just about my exploration anymore. It was about us, standing in a moment neither of us fully understood, where love and uncertainty existed side by side, refusing to be separated. The stranger beside me felt distant now, almost secondary, like the background of a story that had quietly become something else entirely. Because the real tension, the real gravity, was between the two of us. And the question neither of us dared to ask out loud: if we crossed this invisible line completely, would we find something deeper, or lose something we could never rebuild? Something shifted the moment he said it. I don't know. It lingered between us, not fragile, not weak, but alive in a way certainty never was. And instead of pulling away, I felt myself lean into that honesty, even as it unsettled everything I thought we understood about each other. Because he had always known. Or at least, he had always seemed to. But now, he was standing where I had been for so long, inside the question instead of outside it. And that changed everything. The film's glow dimmed for a moment as the scene on screen faded to black, and in that brief darkness, I saw a reflection more clearly than before. Not just outlines, but distance. A space that hadn't been there when we first sat down. Not physical. Something quieter. Something harder to name. I swallowed, my voice finding its way out before I could soften it. We can stop. The words surprised even me. Not because I didn't mean them, but because they carried a truth I hadn't fully admitted until now. This wasn't about proving anything anymore. Not about freedom or exploration or even honesty. It was about him. About us. He shifted then, finally turning toward me completely. The movement felt bigger than it was, like the axis of the night had tilted. And for a second, I thought he might say yes. That he would take my hand, stand up, and we would walk out of the theater into something simpler. Something easier to explain, easier to hold on to. But instead, he studied me. Not the situation. Not the moment. Me. Would you want to? He asked. The question landed deeper than I expected. Because it wasn't about permission. It was about desire. And, suddenly, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't prepared for, not because of what I had done, but because of what I might choose if there were no right answer to hide behind. I hesitated. And that hesitation said more than anything else could have. His gaze didn't harden, but it changed. Not with anger. Not even with hurt. With recognition. Like he had just seen a version of me that didn't fully belong to him anymore. And maybe never had. The stranger beside me shifted slightly, as if aware of the tension but not part of it anymore. The space between us, between all of us, felt fragile now, like something that could collapse with the smallest movement. But neither of us moved. Because this was the real moment. Not what we had tiptoed around before. Not the curiosity, not the quiet agreements. This was the edge where love met truth without protection. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about how far we could go. It was about what we were willing to lose to find out. The moment didn't break. It unfolded. Slowly, like something that had always been waiting for us to arrive here. I looked at him, really looked this time, without the safety of half-glances or borrowed shadows, and I felt it clearly. Not confusion. Not even fear. Just truth, standing quietly between us. I don't know how to be smaller than this, I admitted, my voice soft but steady. I don't know how to turn off parts of myself just to make things feel easier. The words didn't rush. They settled. And for a second, I wondered if they would hurt him. But he didn't pull away. Instead, something in his expression softened, not in defeat, not in surrender, but an understanding that felt deeper than agreement. "I never wanted you smaller," he said, just as quietly. "I just didn't know what it would feel like to see all of you at once." That was it. The truth we had been circling. Not about permission. Not about boundaries. But about witnessing. Because loving someone in theory is easy. Loving them in their full, unfiltered reality, that's where things change. The weight in my chest shifted, not disappearing, but becoming something I could finally hold without hiding from it. I reached for his hand. Not out of habit. Out of choice. And when our fingers met, there was no hesitation. Just warmth. Familiar, grounding, real. The stranger beside me exhaled softly, almost like a signal that the moment had moved beyond him now. And he was right. This was no longer about the space between three people. It was about the space we had either closed or finally understood. "I'm still here," I whispered. Not as reassurance. As a promise. His thumb brushed lightly against my hand, a small, human gesture, but it carried everything we hadn't been able to say before. "I know," he replied. And then, after a pause that felt like a quiet turning point, "That's what makes this harder, and worth it." I felt something settle inside me then. Not resolution in the neat, perfect sense. But clarity. We hadn't broken anything. But we hadn't stayed the same either. And maybe that was the truth we needed to accept, that love isn't about staying untouched. It's about choosing each other, even after you've seen how much you're capable of becoming. The screen lit up brighter as the credits finally began to roll. But neither of us looked away from each other. Because the real ending was just beginning to take shape. We didn't rush out when the credits ended. The theater lights rose slowly, gently pulling us back into the ordinary world, but nothing about us felt ordinary anymore. The seats, the screen, even the quiet shuffle of people leaving, it all felt like a distant echo of something we had just moved through together. I let go of his hand only to stretch my fingers, but the warmth lingered, like a quiet imprint I didn't want to lose. We stood up side by side. Not ahead of each other. Not apart. Together, but different. The stranger left first. There was no awkwardness, no need for words. Just a brief glance, a mutual understanding that whatever role he had played in this moment, it had already dissolved into something else, something that belonged only to us now. As we stepped into the aisle, I felt lighter. Not because things were resolved in a perfect, tied-up way, but because nothing was hidden anymore. Outside, the night air greeted us with a softness that felt almost intentional. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And so had he. We walked in silence at first, our steps naturally falling into rhythm like they always used to. But now there was something new between us, not distance, not doubt, but awareness. "I think I understand you more now," he said quietly, breaking the silence as we reached the car. I looked at him, searching for what that meant, not the words, but the feeling behind them. "And?" I asked. He smiled faintly, not with certainty, but with something more honest. "I think I understand myself less." I let out a soft breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." He nodded, opening the car door but pausing before getting in. "For the first time," he said, "I don't feel like we're following a script." Neither did I. And maybe that was the point, not to have all the answers, not to define every boundary perfectly, but to stay present, to keep choosing each other in the middle of uncertainty. Because love, real love, wasn't about control or clarity. It was about courage. We got into the car, the silence returning, but now it felt full instead of empty. Alive instead of fragile. As he started the engine, I rested my head back, watching the reflection of streetlights pass across the windshield like fleeting thoughts. We hadn't lost each other. We had found a more honest version of us. And sometimes, that's the bravest kind of love there is, the kind that doesn't ask you to be less, only to stay.